Thank you very much for inviting me to speak with you today. My name is Amy Ertan. As mentioned, I'm a cybersecurity researcher, so I am researching with the NATO's Cooperative Cyber Defense Centre of Excellence. I'm also affiliated with the Belfer Centre for Science and International Affairs at Harvard Kennedy School, and I am at Royal Holloway, University of London, where I'm finalising my PhD on cybersecurity and the emerging security landscape. So I'm here to talk to you today about cybersecurity in the legislative landscape, digital transformation and strategy. And given my introduction, it's probably not a surprise to you that I'm going to be talking about how essential it is that we think about security, are informed on security and cybersecurity when designing and developing legislation in this area. So, to set the scene slightly. So I think most of you will be familiar with why security is important, but just to drop some aspects of this and bring them to the table. We are already in a very challenging landscape, and we are increasingly reliant on digital technologies, internet connected technologies, something that is a core component of digital transformation and digital society. These stats are from the European Union, predicting reliance on 25 billion connected devices by 2025. We've had the current reliance amplified over the last year with people working remotely, connecting to their data, their roles remotely, and that's something that will persist to an extent. We are already in an environment where we see constant challenges and frequent threats in the news, both to civilians who lose their data, who have their data breached, to businesses, but of course to state. There really is no sector that is immune from cybersecurity considerations. And one aspect of this, one kind of starting consideration is the cost. Cyber criminals and the cost of cybercrime has doubled from 2015 to 2020. And no matter where you look, you will see kind of predictions that the cost of cybersecurity failures will go up. And what does that actually mean, apart from talking points? All of these news stories on the slide in front of me are taken from the last 2 weeks on the right. Not having adequate cybersecurity or experiencing a cyber incident means that people can have access to your data, which for a nation, for a government, might mean espionage. It might mean that the availability of the data is taken away. You might suffer a denial of service attack or ransomware that completely takes public services offline. Particularly with sensitive data, there are stories where defense information or personal data has been breached. That's critical concern for the public sector. And of course, it's not just there. Everything can be vulnerable. You have kind of data breaches that impact not just public services, but vendors who support them, the supply chain risk. There are existing risks that are difficult to patch. And of course, the landscape is evolving. So there are new threats emerging all the time. Some of the examples on here, of course, include WannaCry on the bottom left, ransomware against the UK National Health Service and other public sector services internationally. SolarWinds, a supply chain threat that meant that several US federal agencies were compromised in a very sophisticated attack. Attacks may be sophisticated, they may not. At the end of the day, it means that something, an asset or data relating to a person has been compromised. And there are many ways in which actors can try to mitigate or prevent an incident happening. And when we turn to look at legislation, the role of legislative branches in taking an informed approach to digital transformation and developing legislation that can really help prevent a number of these incidents. I'd like to take a quote from the foreword to the UK government transformation strategy. And it says, "Our commitment to digital transformation means we must do this in a way that takes into account the risks of the digital age. We must therefore ensure that we move forward in a way that is secure, deters criminal behaviour, and which maintains our commitment to individuals' privacy." So in a way, there's opportunity for legislation to take account of the context of what we're actually kind of living in, and work to protect that and improve it, but also to look forward, move forward, and ensure that legislation accounts for future change too. And of course, privacy is a huge component that overlaps with security. Protecting assets, protecting data, also maintains citizens' privacy. And going down a little deeper into what does it actually mean to consider cybersecurity considerations when looking at legislation in this space. So I have some suggestions here. The first is potentially self-evident. It is to approach a design of legislation thinking about security first. And this is something you'll see across security functions, security sectors, security-focused design. Thinking about how something, a service, an initiative, a product could be exploited. Thinking about ways in which there may be vulnerabilities and then acting to prevent them. Again, at the same time, putting security first, I've also included human-centered design, thinking about the users and how people interact with digital technologies and digital services is essential to design appropriate security, to make sure that you can predict the different ways people will interact and account for that, but also to make sure that it's accessible and inclusive. And I know this language will be familiar to many of you looking at digital transformation more generally. This means making sure that digital services, services set out in legislation or processes set out in legislation are secure, that processes are reliable and have high quality performance. And this means taking that informed approach, taking that security focused design and making it appropriate to the situation. So where you're thinking about data, citizens' data or sensitive data, making sure you have enhanced security measures that match kind of the risk associated with that space, with that data. Beyond this actual cyber defense, cyber hygiene, there are broader themes. Who is responsible? Who is accountable? What are these processes when it comes to security and risk? Are there external bodies that are tasked with monitoring, with responding to incidents? Within government, who has oversight? Who coordinates? Legislation, as I mentioned, must always be forward-looking. I thought the previous session was very interesting, talking about the potential for artificial intelligence, which is one of a number of emerging technologies that will impact digital society and that will also impact security and cybersecurity, both enhancing defense capabilities, but also technologies that can be used in a malicious way to automate attacks, to really scale up attacks too. So this landscape will constantly evolve and effective legislation must be able to account for that. I think this was also touched on in the last session, but the idea of culture as well and strong security culture is something that I would add. Making sure that people are informed, are engaged with the idea of cybersecurity is something that you cannot afford to ignore. For those that maybe aren't familiar with cybersecurity strategies and principles and work that has been done nationally, there are resources to help start thinking about incorporating security principles into wider legislation. National resources, I think, would be an excellent first place. You have expertise, you have skill, you do have, sort of nations will have cyber policy resources to various extents. And of course, can look outwards to regional alliances to help in that aspect. I've included points on the EU cybersecurity strategy as what I think is quite a neat example of a doctrine that nests itself within different kinds of legislation, including low-level cybersecurity legislation and actual verification legislation and policies, but also connecting itself with digital innovation more broadly. For the EU, that means the Digital Europe programme and kind of digital investment mechanisms. So can be a source of best practice guidance there. And the other resources I've listed are materials actually reviewing approaches to digital transformation in ways that consider security. So the OECD has a book on this with a chapter on digital security policy. And of course, you can look to see how other sectors have approached this challenge, whether that's industry or international organizations. I think within the time I have, I really had the message that cybersecurity is a crucial component of all things digital. And to be able to account for that when preparing legislation, to really ensure that that is incorporated in detail, in a clear way that can be implemented, is better than responding to something. Prevention is better than cure. And I'll refer to the quote on this slide, which says, "To be prepared is half the victory." So that was my presentation, and I'm very happy to take questions on the themes discussed here. Thank you very much.